Thought I'd come outside today because, if I'm honest, just looking at the video, you could almost be mistaken for thinking I'm back in Australia because it is sunny at last. I am still in Norway. I'm still doing a whole bunch of meetings around Project Svalbard, which of course is the sale of Have I Been Pwned. So I've been spending a bunch of time with some various folks here in Norway, a bunch of time on the phone, and I'll talk about it next week, but about to spend a bunch of time on yet another corner of the world as well. But for the moment, I'm still here in Norway and the sun is out, which is awesome. It hasn't been particularly summery, if I'm honest, not by my usual standards. In fact, most of the time here in Norway, during the summer, it has been colder than my winter back home, which is a little bit disappointing, but you know. Anyway, here we are. Sun has come out. The only problem in Norway when the sun comes out and it gets warm, yesterday I got up to about 29 Celsius, which is like a coolish summer day for us back home. Problem here is the houses are very good at being designed to get warmed up, not so good at being designed to get cooled down. So where in Australia, certainly every modern house now you'd have air conditioning, so you just flick the thing on and you're okay. Here it's like open the windows, but it's like central Oslo, so now it's noisy. So it's a little bit of a challenge with the temperature management here, but you know, look, if that's the biggest problem at the moment, I'd be quite happy. It's not the biggest problem, unfortunately, because there is a whole bunch of stuff to deal with, but here we are, sun's out, relaxed now. So, jumping into things, where should we start here? I've got a bunch of different little notes on various things, and one of them here is Scott's Hack Yourself First UK tour. He has done Manchester, he's done London, next week he is in Glasgow. So July 18 and 19, which should be Thursday and Friday next week, Scott will be in Glasgow. I'll drop links into registration there. So if you are anywhere accessible to Glasgow, that is a good session to go along to. You should do that. Very, very strange thing happened while Scott was doing his workshop this week, actually, with another client. He tweeted something about modifying my troyhuntsucks.com site. And somehow someone who none of us have any evidence to indicate who it is, created scotthelmsucks.com. Now, I'm not saying that you should go there and look at it immediately, but it is worthwhile going and looking at. So, yeah, we have fun with these workshops. Glasgow next week. Anyway, that's Scott. Data breaches. Now, here's where there's a bit more time to spend. I'll start with the easy bit first. I just loaded a data breach this morning. It's ZenEye. If you're listening to this, you probably don't have an account in ZenEye, even though there's 5 million different records there. It's a Chinese dating website. Data breach dates back to 2011. There's a public disclosure on it from the organisation involved. This is really just filling in historical gaps. There's not a big news story for my Chinese demographic. Can you even get YouTube in China these days? Not even sure. Anyway, this is, again, just part of filling in the gaps. And I do have just this like never-ending list of data breaches that will help me do just that. Which brings me to the next discussion around the Project Svalbard piece. And if you're just tuning in now and have missed the last few weeks, Project Svalbard is the sale of Have I Been Pwned into a place that can basically help me do a lot more with it. And one of the big topics that is coming up every time I have one of these meetings with an organisation that's interested in being part of this process is about processing more data. I really, really desperately want to get more data processed. Now, I tend to try and prioritise the larger things. I did the ZenEye one today because it's 5 million records. That's quite a lot. 77% of them, by the way, I think it was, were already in Have I Been Pwned. So I've been working through the larger stuff, the more significant stuff. I have seen a couple of things just overnight about a couple of fairly major brands that have been hit with breaches. And there's some samples floating around, so we might see those pop up shortly, and there'll be some big names that are going to have been pwned. I won't say what they are just now, because until I see data, until I can confirm it, I don't want to throw these organisations under the bus. But as part of Project Svalbard and moving into this next organisation, this is one of the big things I want to tackle. I really, really want to be able to churn through a lot more data. And I was having some meetings on this just yesterday and sort of talking through the workflow of this whole thing, where it's like, look, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's already sitting there that needs to be processed, that I have access to or is readily accessible in other locations on the internet. There's a bunch of other people with data that would certainly be willing to come forward and contribute more of it. And that has definitely upticked since I announced Project Svalbard 2, and it's had a bit more focus. So there's all of that. There's a lot of organisations that have been in data breaches that I really desperately want to reach and let them know about. There's one I'm dealing with at the moment where I can't get in touch with the company. I think I'm probably just going to end up having to load it today anyway, despite sort of best efforts to find someone there and get them to deal with it properly. So I really want to make that happen. And then of course I want to make sure that the people in these breaches get notifications and they learn about it, because the bit that pains me is I'm sitting on information which has got hundreds of millions, if not billions, of different people's email addresses and their passwords. They don't know about it. The organisations involved often don't know about it. The only people I'm confident know about it is the bad guys who are taking the data and then using it for credential stuffing attacks and things like that in order to log into people's accounts. And that pains me. I really, really want to get that sorted out. Off the tail end of that as well is that once we have more data, that gives us more things like more passwords in order to be able to feed into Pwned Passwords and then use proactively against credential stuffing attacks and things like that. So there's this whole like ecosystem where there's a massive opportunity to make it much, much, much better. And this is why I'm spending so much effort and quite frankly so much money as well on trying to get this Project Svalbard thing sorted out. That the money goes into things like, unfortunately it is not cheap, paying like KPMG mergers and acquisitions. There's everything from travel to accommodation to some very extensive legal fees coming up in order to do everything from documentation through to establishing all the legal bases and things around processing and the legitimacy of the company. So it's a massive investment on my behalf, and I want to try and make sure that that pays off in the respect of getting more data processed and more organisations aware of what's going on, and of course more individuals as well. I'm probably in a bunch of these data breaches which are sitting there. I've surprised myself at the places my data has appeared. So that is data breaches. Stay tuned for that. I'm basically just trying to balance how much time I spend loading new data breaches with building out new features. There's a really major feature for Have I Been Pwned I'm trying to finish that's going to solve a bunch of problems for a bunch of people. Doing that, and then obviously just like signing non-stop NDAs all day and having meetings, and also trying to keep my sanity as well. I have been playing a bit of tennis here, which has helped. I've had some very, very good hits with tennis within the really spot-on coach, which has been good. Anyway, back to business. A few other little bits, and then I'm going to talk about a new blog post as well. Namecheap. Now, I'm going to start at the end, which is that Namecheap has ended up handling this well, but it didn't start well for them. Now, Namecheap has actually featured before in terms of me getting, I don't know if a bit upset's the right word, me fundamentally disagreeing with some of their principles. And there was a blog post that popped up, it looks like about, where are we now, about 2 weeks ago or something like that, maybe 3 weeks ago. And someone just brought it to my attention yesterday. And effectively this was, that the title of this, you can go to archive.org if you want to see the whole thing because it's not there anymore. The title of it was Beware of Dragons When Choosing Your SSL. Now, the issue aside of just the wording, choosing your SSL, which is very, very strange, the basic premise of it was something that we've seen many times from commercial CAs, which is like be scared of free certificates because free certificates have problems. By the way, here's these expensive ones that you can come and buy. And that always, always, always feels bad. I did actually look at it. I'm always kind of curious when someone writes a piece like this, like who was actually writing it? I'm trying to forget who it was. It might have been like PC Online wrote one some time back, written by a guy that didn't seem to be someone who sort of spends a lot of time in the industry, but was an author and was obviously paid to do it. In fact, he said it was sponsored by Sectigo. So okay, that is the sort of company that unfortunately pays people to create things that spin their angle, which is usually wrong when it comes to the efficacy of things like external validation certificates. The case here was the piece was written by a lady who I didn't do much research into beyond finding her Twitter profile with a byline of believes in magic. And I thought, well, you know, this is actually quite apt because I think some of the things that she's actually explained here in the blog post basically boil down to magic. In other words, it really doesn't quite work. So let me explain. Also, the reason it was brought to my attention, it had some really crazy things in it, it also had a reference to something that I'd written about the speed of HTTPS, namely HTTP vs https.com. If you haven't seen that before, go there. It's a really, really good example which illustrates what, in essence, is the difference between the speed of HTTP 1.1 versus HTTP 2. But because you can only get HTTP 2 in browsers that are running, let me rephrase that sounded terrible. Because all of today's browsers only support HTTP 2 over HTTPS and not HTTP, in order to get the speed advantages of H2, you have to be on a secure connection. So anyway, I wrote this piece about it. I said something like, I want to go fast, HTTPS is massive speed advantage. Anyway, so these guys linked through to that because they're trying to make the point you should get HTTPS because one of the benefits is speed. Incidentally, you also get Brotli compression, which is a much more efficient compression algorithm if you have access to that algo on your machines. So they linked through to that. They also talked about how EV reduces phishing attacks, which it doesn't. It's just absolute bullshit. Think about the premise of this, right? So in this case, they were saying, go and get an EV certificate, because then when people see the EV certificate in the browser, they will trust your site more than if it's not there. Therefore, that reduces phishing attacks because you get greater trust. And the reason it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever is because the vast majority of technical people don't know what EV is. They know what the padlock is, and 99.999%, let's just agree on that number because I think it's pretty close, of the consumer audience has got no idea what it is. So when they go to a phishing site using a DV certificate and they just see a padlock, the fact that the legitimate site actually has EV means absolutely nothing to them because they're still fooled by the phishing site. Anyway, it's just a bullshit argument. They were also arguing that 90-day certs, so obviously they're taking shots at Let's Encrypt here, 90-day certs are risky because they expire. And I've said in this tweet here, and I will link through to the tweet that I put out, I've said, look, actually short-lived certs are a virtue, not a risk. We have fundamental problems with certificate revocation. One of the things that absolutely positively ensures a certificate is no longer usable is if it has expired. So there's a big difference between a 90-day window of risk on, say, a Let's Encrypt certificate or a say 2 years window of risk on an EV certificate. Incidentally too, I know we always make the association of free certificates to Let's Encrypt, but Bypass, based here in Norway, also provide free certificates and also provide them over the Acme protocol. So, and look, I've sat down and literally had coffee with the Let's Encrypt people, and they've said, look, we're really supportive of the likes of Bypass. We want everyone to get free certificates. That's the goal, not for them to become the biggest gorilla out there. So you go and get a Bypass certificate for all I care. The point is that when you have automation, the 30-day problem goes away, a 90-day problem goes away. I had someone arguing on Twitter saying, well, yes, but automation fails, therefore it's bad. So, well, like that's your argument? Like, do you think manual humans fail? By the way, there are ways of monitoring that your certificates are actually renewed. You can do this much more proactively than just waiting for stuff to fail and then going, oh, Let's Encrypt was bad because my whatever certbot it was didn't renew the certificate. Anyway, so there's that. They talk about the warranty. Oh man, the warranty is such a bullshit argument. Scott wrote a piece about warranty on certificates some time ago, and we tried really hard to get to the bottom of what the warranty gives you and also who actually has ever claimed a warranty. And I'm going to go off the top of my head here, so apologies if I get any of this wrong, but it basically boiled down to the warranty protects the consumer if a certificate is misissued and then they go to the site, they see the certificate, they hand over their credit card data, they get defrauded, and something bad happens as a result of misissuance. And it's kind of like, well, if I was a company going to buy a certificate in order to protect my customers coming to my site, how does that help me if there's another site which is like a phishing site and they get the it doesn't make sense in any way whatsoever. Actually, in Scott's blog post, when we did actually really push harder on a certificate reseller, I think it was, and said, look, you know, you're selling these certificates based on this premise. What does it do? Who actually benefits from it? We got told that we were nerds from Nerdville and that no one else cares. Now, don't let that stop them from actually trying to sell certificates based on the fact that they have a warranty, but you get the idea. And there was another point in here as well, which was really screwy, which was like, it was basically saying not all free certificates work in all browsers. And it was sort of implying that if you go out and get a Let's Encrypt certificate, there are some browsers in which it won't work. Now, this is true. There are some browsers in which a Let's Encrypt certificate won't work. It is a very, very small number of very, very old ones. Your customers are not coming from those because otherwise it won't even run everything that you've actually got on your website today. I mean, you literally have to go back so far to get clients that won't support a Let's Encrypt certificate. It's just crazy. So anyway, this was a very bullshit argument. And I followed up on that and said, there's a whole heap of rubbish issues beyond that, but I wanted to compress the biggies into a single tweet. Ping Scott Helmer I for more, but seriously, this is a FUD-riddled article, purely motivated by financial incentives, and it needs fixing. The CEO replied shortly afterwards and said they've pulled the entire post. Now, I reckon, as much as I disagree with what was in the post itself, I reckon the guy needs a big pat on the back, because to turn around and go, look, we stuffed this up, it was wrong, we're sorry, it's gone, does take some guts. You know, it is eating a big slice of humble pie in order to do that. So good on him for doing that. I hope we can see other organisations be as responsible. I doubt that we will, but I don't know. Then again, maybe like over time, when people sort of realise that this is just crazy to be having debates around things like it's risky because of 90 days or because of browser compatibility. Maybe this will just become so absurdly ridiculous that no one will write this crap anymore. And of course, they still will, but hopefully not as much. All right, that was that. Another piece here as well. This popped up. It might have even been, when was this? This might have been last week, and I just didn't talk about it. EVE Online. So EVE Online, for those of you who don't know, and I had to learn because I am not an EVE Online player, is a massive online multiplayer game. And it was actually just about a week ago that this popped up. EVE Online, particularly courtesy of Stefan, who works with the organisation there, wrote a whole bunch of stuff about what they're doing to improve security for EVE Online players. Now, Stefan was over here in Oslo last year when I was here at NDC. He and Scott and I spent a bunch of time together, had some beers, nice social time, talked about a whole bunch of things that we could do to improve security. He was in my workshop as well, which was really awesome. And it's really, really cool to see the stuff that's actually going into EVE Online now. Now, I didn't realise how important account takeover is for EVE Online. It's an online game. I was like, it's fun, some kids will use it, something like that. And of course, that shows how much I know about online games, because this happens to be absolutely massive. People of all ages use it. They build up valuable things in there. Someone's going to tell me I'm wrong about the correct nomenclature here, but they build up some form of credits or assets or inventory over a long period of time. It's important to them. If someone else gets into their account and sells it or deletes it or does whatever, it can be a nightmare for them. Also, because when we're talking about games, we probably are going to be talking about a higher demographic of young people than usual. We're going to end up with a bunch of people that maybe haven't thought through password practices and things as much. Now, of course, many people of all ages really don't think through password practices very much, but you would expect it to be higher with that sort of demographic. So they've written a post here with a few really interesting bits in here. Now, one of them is that every single EVE Online player is getting a 6-month free trial for 1Password for Family, which is super cool. Now, 1Password for Family, I think from memory, it's normally about $5 a month, and you get to have something like 5 different family members on it. So 6 months gets you in the door with that, not just for yourself, but for your whole family, just by being an EVE Online player. Now, think about the incentive for EVE Online. Account takeover is a big thing. It doesn't just impact the players, it impacts the organisation, because support needs to deal with the fact that you get people calling up going, I've got like 3 years worth of spaceship inventory and it all just got deleted. What do I do? So whatever they can do to decrease the rate of account takeover would reduce their support overhead and of course keep their players happier. So giving people password managers so that they can create strong passwords is a really, really good idea. Speaking of the 1Password folks over the years, one of the things I've learned as well is that the stickiness of people who get into a password manager is really, really high. So once you actually start using a password manager and you just get over the initial barrier of, hey, this is something different to my usual thing, people love it and they stick with it. So it makes a lot of sense for them as well, because of course they get a whole bunch of other people using the service. So that was part of it. 1Password was great. They've referenced Scott Helm in here a bit as well. So EVE Online is also using Report URI for things like their content security policy reporting. So they've got that box ticked, which is great. And then the other bit related to me is they've been using Pwned Passwords for quite some time. And in fact, I've shared a bunch of stats before from EVE Online about Pwned Passwords. One of the ones here that is super cool is they talk about the fact, and now that I'm talking about this, I've got a feeling I did mention this last week. Let's see if it was in there. And, no, I didn't mention it last week. So one of the things that's really cool, and the stat was something like, when they originally rolled out Pwned Passwords, something like 19% of every login was using a password that had previously been seen in a data breach. That number is now down to something like 11 to 12%. So you've got, I think I worked out it was like a 42% decrease in the number of people logging on with a known bad password that's already been in a data breach. So again, from an account takeover perspective, think about what that means. You've got a significantly smaller portion of your audience that is at a heightened risk of having account takeovers due to reused credentials that appear in other data breaches. Exactly the same lists that I have in Pwned Password are the lists that people are using for account takeover attempts. Now, of course, there are new lists coming through all the time. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment too. But you can see the value proposition here. Again, if EVE Online can reduce the prevalence of bad passwords that are being used, give people more access to tools like 1Password to be able to create good passwords, it's all warm and fuzzy, and it's a really, really cost-effective thing to do. I don't know what deal they have with 1Password or if it costs them anything. I can tell you what deal they have with me for Pwned Passwords. No deal. It doesn't cost anything because the whole thing is there for free. So I'm just super, super happy to actually see them using that and using it in a really effective way. And also very, very happy to see them talking publicly about this as well. I would really love to see more security success stories shared publicly because I want other companies to see that and go, hey, this looks pretty awesome. We should do this as well. So if you're in another organization out there and would like to integrate Pwned Passwords or 1Password for 6 months for free or whatever it may be, do that. Look at this stuff. If you want an intro to Stefan, I'll give you that intro too, because this is really, really cool stuff. Now, Pwned Passwords. Boy. So I have version 5 of Pwned Passwords, which should be launching today or tomorrow. Now, it was going to be earlier this week, but I screwed something up, and it wasn't major in the scheme of things, and I managed to sort of pull the whole thing before it did become a problem. But basically, what I do is, as new data breaches come in, whenever I have passwords available in plain text, I just keep adding them to the repository of the next version of Pwned Passwords. And I was getting up to quite a few new, well, actually, let me choose my wording carefully here. I was getting up to quite a few passwords from the additional set here. So, this is all the stuff I've collected since January when I did the Pwned Passwords version 4. Now, I just want to get my numbers right here. I've put them in this draft blog post. It was something like, what was the total number? I'm getting lost in my own draft blog post here. Look, it was tens of millions. I can't remember the exact number. Anyway, it's tens of millions of new passwords from these different data breaches. And I wanted to... here we go, 65 million. 65 million passwords from various sources. Again, just the ones in plain text, so I don't go through cracking passwords. That's an entire different discussion about why not, but I don't. Stuff that's in plain text, that's a good candidate. So 65 million. Now, when I did my parsing last week, I did most of this. I distilled it all down. I had and I won't even say what the number was because it was a bit different to the one that's there now, and I don't want to confuse things even more. I distilled it down, had a new number, loaded it all into a separate repository so that the API that hits it at the moment, I can just sort of flick from one Azure Blob Storage account through to another one. Got all that ready, bundled up all the downloadable hashes, wrote up the blog post, pressed submit on the blog post, and then I thought, let me just do a couple of checks. Now, I know what you're thinking. It would have been a good idea to do a couple of checks before I press submit. and in part because I've just been so overwhelmed with this whole Svalbard process and trying to do a gazillion things at once, I missed that one thing. Did a few checks, and then I went, this isn't making sense. Like, I'm searching for things which should have different counts to the counts I thought they should have. It just didn't look right, so I pulled the blog post like 60 seconds later. I didn't tweet it or anything like that. The RSS aggregator did pick it up. I think a few people had it appear in their RSS feeds because I got a few questions like, hey, I tried to go to this blog post and didn't load. So anyway, I sort of reversed that, went through, analysed it further, and found that a bunch of the source data had control characters in it. Now, control characters are parsing problems. It's not people actually using control characters in their passwords. So I wanted to go through and fix all of that source data. And unfortunately, the fixing of the source data, not so hard. The recrunching of the aggregate counts for every single password, and then the dumping of it into SHA-1 ordered by SHA-1, SHA-1 ordered by prevalence, NTLM ordered by NTLM, NTLM ordered by prevalence, and then dumping out all of the hash prefixes to go into blob storage for k-anonymity, zipping it all and trying to upload it over the internet, means that what was going to be a Tuesday release, I'm now on Thursday morning, is probably going to be a Friday release. So I think I'm almost there now. So I'm going to talk about it now anyway. 3.7 million additional passwords. This doesn't seem like a lot when there were 551 million passwords in there already. But I didn't want to sort of go too long without having new passwords in there. I think a 6-month cadence as it is way longer than what I'd like, and I'll talk about what I'd like to in the future with this in a moment. So there's going to be those. Now the 65 million individual passwords, that is also going to have an impact on the counts of existing records in there. So password with a capital P and an @ symbol, which has already been in there, will go from like 52,000 records to 53,000 or 54,000. Now when I say records, occurrences of this password in data breaches. So those numbers will go up a little bit, plus of course there'll be the new ones. I want to have the new ones in there because I want to make sure that people using this get the benefit of knowing that these passwords have been leaked since the last edition of Pwned Passwords, or certainly I have obtained them since the last edition of Pwned Passwords, and they get the benefit. Now some of the passwords that are in there, there's things like my noob, all one word with a capital M, that's in there 1,200 times, wasn't in the previous versions. Find_pass with a capital F. Guns and robots. Now of course that is a game as well, so I don't know, I don't disclose the individual data sources, again for various reasons, we can talk about that another time. I don't know that it is a guns and robots per se data breach. It might have been a forum about that or something else. So that's in there 134 times too. So what will happen is, hopefully by the time you see this video, I will have published the Pwned Passwords post, and you'll then be able to go through and download those. If you're using k-anonymity, you'll get the benefit of that automatically. It will just be there on the API. If you're not using k-anonymity because you don't want the dependency, or you don't want to send even like a partial hash, just download the data. So there are easy solutions depending on your appetite for how you consume the system. Alrighty, so now this was the other thing I want to talk about with Pwned Passwords. As part of the Svelbar stuff, I would really like to see much more of a fire hose of data going into Pwned Passwords. I would like to see, for example, I mentioned a couple of data breaches that have been brought to my attention just last night. When I obtain those, I would like to see, in a matter of hours afterwards, not days, weeks, months, that sort of thing, hours, having those passwords in Pwned Passwords so that organisations like EVE Online immediately get the benefit, because we know that once someone grabs this data, people are going to be out there, I don't know how the passwords are stored, if they're hashed, people are going to be out there cracking hashes, they're going to be taking username password pairs that were active, let's say 3 days ago, and they're going to be throwing them at services like EVE Online. So I really, really, really want to see, as part of this Have I Been Pwned acquisition, resources thrown at building out that capability on Pwned Passwords so that we can just get much, 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 much better at proactively protecting accounts. Okay, so that was that. Last thing, sponsor again this week, as per last week, is Shape Security. So Shape Security, whilst we're speaking about account takeover attacks and all that sort of thing, does a lot of work around protecting credential stuffing. They're talking about how capture is no longer enough. Shape connects, blocks automation, and improves security instantly with a 30-minute implementation. So these guys specialize in how do we stop bad people with whole bunches of email address password pairs that they'll get from data breaches like the ones I just mentioned. How do we stop someone who's an attacker but coming there with a legitimate email address, legitimate password, actually getting access to your system? So go and check out Shape. They're certainly one of the leaders in this field and well worth a look. So that's it for this week. Next week I will still be here in Oslo, and I'll talk a little bit more about how this whole Svalbard process is going, and I'll talk about where I'm going next when I come to you from Oslo in a week from now. Thanks very much for listening.